All right. So what I want to do now is to talk about competitive firms and markets in long run equilibrium. And what we need to do is to think about the characteristics of competitive markets and what distinguishes long run from short run. So let me go back to my other camera. And so we went through those four cases: profit maximization, loss minimization, shutdown, and normal profit. And each of those is a short run equilibrium. Only one of them is a long run equilibrium. So let's see if we can identify which one that is. So again, we'll start with our picture of the market and a typical firm within that market. And let's start with this scenario. Suppose a firm and market operate so that price and quantity for the industry are set here. And hopefully we'll focus here in a moment. And that means a typical firm is going to accept its let's try that. That's better. Maybe a little bit better. I don't know. So the firm is going to have its demand curve here. And that's also, yeah, that's better, the marginal and average revenue. And so we'll put in average total cost down here. And to keep the picture a little bit less cluttered, I'm just going to use average total cost here. We know that when demand is above average total cost, that the firm will stay in business. And so we don't really need the average variable cost curve in this picture. And let's suppose that that's marginal cost. So in this situation, the typical firm is going to be producing right here where marginal cost equals marginal revenue. And they'll produce this quantity Q star. Okay. Now in this situation, this is a short run equilibrium where the firms are, or the typical firm in this industry is profit maximizing. Question is, as we go to the long run, how does the industry adjust? Well, we assume that there are always entrepreneurs who are out there looking for businesses or for industries in which to start their businesses. And when they get to an industry that looks like this one, they say to themselves, well, this looks pretty interesting because the typical firm here is earning an economic profit of that much per unit, and this entire amount is the firm's total profit. And so they're earning that much more than I could make in my next best alternative. Remember that in your next best alternative, you make an amount that is equivalent to a normal profit. So they're doing better here than a normal profit, better than what the firm could do in its next best alternative. And so what we expect is that this profitability will attract new firms into the industry. And we need to think about how that affects the industry. So let's go back a second. We figured out that a typical firm will price or choose a quantity at which price is equal to marginal cost. And so as price goes up or down, the firm simply moves along its marginal cost curve. Okay. And even when the price goes down below average total cost, the firm moves below and it stays on that marginal cost curve. Only when the price falls below average variable cost does the firm deviate In this case, the firm is going to shut down. And so what we can say is that the marginal cost curve is the firm's supply curve as long as it's above average variable cost. So marginal cost is supply when marginal cost is greater than average variable cost. Okay. I'll come back later and draw a picture of exactly what that looks like. For now, just accept that the marginal cost curve is the firm's supply curve. So here we have a situation where the typical firm is profitable. New firms want to get into the industry, and as they do so, there are new firm supply curves being added to the industry. The market supply is just the sum of all the individual supply curves. So if we add new firms, the market supply is going to increase. Okay, and how long does that take? Well, it takes the long run. Firms can't get set up in the short run because they have to acquire all inputs in order to get up and operating. And so in the long run, we expect that supply in the market will increase. How does that affect the market? Well, it's going to increase the equilibrium quantity and decrease the equilibrium price. That means that for each firm, sorry, I'll turn this back in a second. Each firm now is going to have a demand curve lower than the original one because the price is now lower. And so each firm now will reduce the amount that it produces down here to Q prime. So now each firm is producing less than before, right? There's movement in that direction. The industry as a whole is producing more than before. Why is that? Because there are now more firms. So each existing firm becomes a little smaller, but because there are more firms, total industry output grows. What happens at this point? Well, a typical firm is still earning an economic profit, so there's still an incentive for new firms to keep entering the industry. And we'll assume that that incentive exists and firms keep on entering until the price gets down to here. Call that P double prime, Q double prime. That's the new price level, call it P double prime. And now the typical firm has a demand curve that looks like that. Now the typical firm is producing even less and is earning just a normal profit. We've now reached long-run equilibrium. That's going to be here and here. And so what we see is that as long as there is profit to be had in the for individual firms, firms will continue to enter the industry. Only when we get to the point where the economic profit goes away is there no longer an incentive for firms to enter. Because there's free entry and exit of firms in competition, firms can always enter when they need to or leave if they're losing money. Okay, and in this case, firms continue to enter until the incentive to enter goes away, and it goes away when the typical firm is just earning a normal profit. Before I go on to the next example, let me come back and talk about that supply curve, just to be clear on exactly what that looks like. Okay, so I'll take a big risk here and avoid the straight edge, Q. So here's a firm's marginal cost curve. Average total cost and average variable cost. Okay. So If this is the demand, so this is the price, let's call that P1, the firm will produce, since this is also the marginal revenue, the firm will produce right here where marginal cost equals marginal revenue. And we can keep on changing the price and following the firm as it moves down along the marginal cost curve. And so at each price, the supply curve shows us how much the firm will produce or how much the firm will make available for sale. And what we can see is that as the price falls, the amount the firm makes available for sale just moves along that marginal cost curve. Let the price keep falling. Again, the firm is right here, so it remains on its marginal cost curve. Price falls some more. P4, still there. Right here, and I haven't drawn a very convincing picture, but right where marginal cost crosses average variable cost, that should be minimum average variable cost, right there. And so this is the low point of the marginal cost curve. I'm sorry, the low point of the supply curve. Marginal cost continues below that. And so the supply curve is going to be the entire marginal cost curve until it gets to average variable cost. And below that, the supply curve is here. So that's supply, supply. So the supply curve is the quantity offered for sale is 0 until we get up to that point where price is equal to minimum average variable cost. And above that, the supply curve just moves along the marginal cost curve. They're the same thing. Okay. All right. Let me just mention that it's a little bit strange to go through this material, not being able to see any faces, not being able to read whether you're understanding what I'm saying or not. And so you're going to need to let me know. And I'm going to invite you to send email. Let me know what questions you have. If you want to talk face to face, that's great. I will be happy to answer emails in written form and distribute those widely if possible. I'll be happy to take emails and then create videos answering the questions that you ask so that everyone can see those. We'll figure out what works best. Feel free to let me know what you're thinking, what you're hearing and not hearing that you need to hear from me. Again, it's even when I can see your faces, it's a little bit of a guessing game, as you know, trying to figure out what you're thinking about. You're just going to need to help me out here. All right, so let's take another situation. Let's suppose that we have supply and demand that look like this in the market. So that market price and quantity are going to be set here. Typical firm has to accept that price, and that determines what its demand curve looks like. Now let's suppose that the firm has average total cost that looks like this. I'll give it an average variable cost that looks like this, and marginal cost here. The typical firm then is going to, in this case, choose to produce this quantity. This firm will minimize its loss in the short run by staying open, but in the long run, it will shut down. So in the long run, we're really not all that concerned about the average variable cost curve, because in the long run, if the firm is losing money, whether it's losing enough to shut down in the short run or to shut down only in the long run, it doesn't really matter. Firm's going to want to shut down. So in this case, a typical firm in the industry is operating at a loss. What happens? Well, again, this is an industry in which firms are free to come and go. There's unrestricted entry and exit. And so what we would expect is that firms like this will shut down. Does that mean all the firms shut down at the same time? No. Your firm may reach the long run a year from now when your lease runs out. Another firm may reach the long run next month when their lease runs out. So the timing is going to be different for different firms. And what we expect is the ones who reach the long run first will be the first to drop out. As they drop out, what happens? Well, they're taking these supply curves with them, these marginal cost curve, which is a supply curve. They're taking those out of the market. And so the market supply in the long run will contract as firms exit the industry. Okay? That means that in the long run, the price will be pushed up and equilibrium quantity in the industry will be pushed down. For the typical firm, that higher price is going to be a good thing because the typical firm will be able to reach, whoops, kind of drifted there, will be able to reach normal profit once the price goes higher. Okay? And so now the typical firm with a higher price is going to produce more than before. But because there are fewer firms, the industry gets a little bit smaller. And now this is an industry, again, in long-run equilibrium. The typical firm just earning a normal profit. No incentive for firms to keep leaving. No incentive for new firms to want to enter. And so when we draw a long-run equilibrium for a competitive market, this is how we draw it. I think I put dollars up here and quantity there and dollars here and quantity. And so in long-run equilibrium, market quantity, market price. Oops. There's the demand. And so in long-run equilibrium, the firm's average total cost looks like that. It's just tangent right here. And marginal cost is there. The firm produces this quantity. And that's a firm and industry in long-run equilibrium, just earning a normal profit for the firm, stability for the industry since there's no longer an incentive for new firms to want to enter or for existing firms to want to leave. I think I'm going to stop there. And that gives us an overview of competitive firms in both the long run and the short run. I'll come back to the other camera. And so we've seen what the competitive industry looks like. We've established basic principles of profit maximization, firms operating where marginal cost equals marginal revenue, when firms will shut down, when they'll stay open. And I'm going to stop right now. I may add one more video, we'll see, about long run. I'm going to think about that. And otherwise, I'm going to stop right here. Let me know if you have questions. and I will do my best to answer questions as promptly as possible. All right. Be well. We'll see you soon.